Welcome to the Knowledge Entrepreneurs Show, where we celebrate the innovators driving change in the education industry. At Edison OS, we've worked with over 500 knowledge entrepreneurs to turn their edtech ideas into profitable businesses. Hi, Param. Good evening. Welcome to the Knowledge Entrepreneur Show. Thank you so much for taking your valuable time out for coming here on the show today.
Hi, Jagmohan. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak on this prestigious platform. So, I'll just start very briefly with my background journey as an educational
Sure.
entrepreneur. So, my name is Paramjit, and I'm the founder of a company called GMAT 30. So, we specialize in GMAT prep training and exclusively in GMAT prep training. So, the GMAT is an MBA entrance exam for, well, a lot of overseas business schools, at least for the top business schools, but also for certain business schools in India, such as ISB, SPGen, the IIMs, for example. So it's almost equivalent to CAT, the CAT equivalent of India, except it's meant for working professionals, right? So usually then the MBA is a program which is pursued by people who have got at least 3 years of work experience, right? So most universities require that, except the 2 year programs in IMs, for example, which people enter into immediately after completing their bachelor's programs, and that admission takes place through CAT. But the GMAT otherwise is a universally accepted MBA entrance exam. So I suppose how far back do we go? So I'll just start with my undergrad journey. That's where my journey as a teacher really
Right.
began. So I'd always been fascinated with teaching. I mean, it was something that was really passionate to me. And I suppose the passion for it basically arose through a little bit of my privilege, I suppose, and the belief that I could do it a lot better. So when I was in class 10, back in my hometown in Patna, preparing for board exams. So my parents got a private tutor for me because class 10th and class 12th are supposed to be ultra competitive,
Yeah.
right? Basically, if your board exams marks aren't good, then your future, well, at least in India, definitely is pretty blurry, but even
Right.
overseas, right? And then I didn't really like that methodology of teaching. It was basically carrot and stick theory, literal stick and not literal carrot. So then I thought, there must be a better way, right? I mean, a better way to generate interest in the subject,
Right.
right? And to a certain extent, that comes from developing expertise in the subject itself, being truly passionate about the
Yeah.
subject. So then, when I started my undergrad in Monash University in
Hmm.
Australia, so for the first year, you are not really eligible to apply to any teaching assistantship
Right.
programs. It's only from second year
Right.
onwards that, on the basis of your marks in the first year, they decide whether you can tutor certain subjects. So I was eligible for that, thankfully, because my marks were reasonably decent, and then I started on, I suppose, a paid tutorship job, so to speak. So that was at the age of 19, which is where my journey as a teacher sort of really began to take roots, right? Those were the inception
Right.
stages. And then after I completed my undergrad, so for the remaining 3 years after the first year, I was a teaching assistant. And even during my honors year, I still carried on to that role because I really enjoyed that sort of stuff. I mean, there is no real way to explain it, except that explaining a concept or a set of concepts to students really motivated me. It sort of enabled me to interact with people in the knowledge that I can contribute to a better future for them in
Right.
some way,
Right.
right? And to me, education was a lot more about just lot more than just scoring marks. A lot of the theory and ideas about education, even overseas, right? Usually they say that the educational system overseas is much more developed than in India. And I don't think that's really true because even over there, during the course of my undergrad degree, most of the focus was on getting through, basically, right? I mean, getting the bare minimum, whether it be a distinction, high
Right.
distinction. And for that, you really did not need to do too much. I mean, even if you could cram just a week to 10 days prior to the exam, that would really be sufficient to get you an HD as well,
Right.
right? Because all the questions would come from the class notes. or from the assignments that were assigned to them during the sessions, right? So people say in India the education system is flawed because it rewards rote memorization over truly understanding the concepts. But so is the case in the US or in Australia as well, right? Everyone that I've spoken to, or most people I've spoken to, you'd see them scoring 90, 95, and they wouldn't really truly be able to explain the tougher level concepts or why a certain thing is the way it is. And that is where I felt that I could add in a lot of value, right? That simple ability to truly simplify the complex bits of detail so that you don't have to just learn it for the exam, but you truly understand it. And it basically enhances your problem solving skills, right? And those are the skills that will ultimately help you later during your life as well. Because, learning should have that purpose, right? At least A, the ability to research things, and B, the ability to truly understand and solve problems, right? So those were the two goals that I always, sort of wanted to inculcate in my students as well, those two thought processes. Now, then I came back to India end of 2016, right? Which is when I started with Jamboree. So Jamboree Education is a company which again focuses on GMAT, GRE, SAT prep. They have their offices all over India, but also in a couple of other places such as Singapore, Nepal, and UAE as well, right? So that's where my journey with Jamboree started, right? And that was a journey that lasted close to 3 years, basically.
Right.
So, sorry, I came back to India not end of 2016, but end of 2015. And I started with Jamboree from the March of 2016. So, from March 2016 through March 2019, that was my first stint with Jamboree, right? And then, there was 2 to 3 months of notice period. So all told, I left Jamboree around August, September of 2019, right? And then that is where I sort of wanted to think about starting my own company as well, right? Because so I'd been teaching the GMAT for 3.5 years by that time, and then I truly believed that I had learned all that there is to know from a subject level perspective, right? Okay, beyond that, there isn't really anything much that I could learn in terms of the GMAT, right? Plus, I had a score of 750. I had two scores of 740 myself, and that pretty much puts you at a solid 98 percentile. But I still thought that there could be something more that I could do before starting my own company, right? I mean, I always prefer to go the more conservative route. 5 years is, definitely by any measure, a reasonable amount of experience and is good enough to start your own organization. Plus, my feedback as a teacher itself was pretty good, simply because I was extremely passionate about the subject. And I used to put in a lot of hours researching the concepts, finding ways to clarify, visualize, explain in simple terms to the student, right? Because someone who has been teaching the GMAT for 3 years, sure, he might understand the GMAT, but to explain it to a fresher is an entirely different ballgame, right? For example, Greg Chappell was a great player, but he probably was not a great
Absolutely
coach,
not.
right? And similarly, Gary Custon might not have been a great player, but he definitely was a great coach, right? So I wanted to sort of be in the best of both worlds, that is, be a good scorer myself on the GMAT, and at the same time be a good teacher. Because the GMAT is an exam in which, there is a pretty objective way to tell whether someone is good or whether someone is not. So I thought that a 99 percentile was sort of a bare minimum before I started my own institution. 99 percentile means 760 and beyond on the GMAT. So the GMAT has a scale between 200 and 800, and anything above 760 is considered the 99 percentile. You don't have any decimal points like in CAT, so you don't have 99.2, 99.8, etc. So 750 was just 10 shy of that. 750 was the 98th percentile. So I thought, all right, let's do a bit more. So then I joined IMS in Mumbai. IMS is a company that focuses both on study abroad education, GMAT, GRE, SAT, IELTS, TOEFL, but also on Indian education, such as law exams, CAT, and so on and so forth. So I was in the study abroad sector. I was the verbal head in the study abroad division. So I served in that role for 2 years, involved taking charge of the content, of the webinars, of the some of the sessions, and developing the overall curriculum as such, right? And then during that time, I wrote the GMAT again because, wanted to take another stab at it, and thankfully scored a 770, which was in my mind at least sort of a real, I suppose, proof and a real, objective measure to sort of know that subject wise there is definitely nothing more that I can learn, right? Maybe 750, probably 2 or 3% of the content was left for me to truly master, but a 770 further, corroborated my belief that all right, now I think subject wise I'm definitely there. Now it is a matter of starting my own thing,
Right.
right? And that decision, to a certain extent, was also expedited by, unfortunately, the COVID scenario, in which we had to all work from home. And then, when we had to sort of return ultimately to the office, then of course, there were some, obviously that time, the situation that the finances weren't very good. No one was really interested from the business perspective. They were more interested from, how to get business, right? And then the terms and conditions didn't really work out. So, we said goodbyes. But of course, that was the time when I thought, ki, okay, now is definitely the time when I, as my own company, can enter this space, because there was a massive shift into online
Yeah.
education
Yeah.
at that time, right? Offline was really going down in terms of the numbers, and online was sort of going into the ascendancy, right? So that's how I started. So I first of all started February end 2021, and that's when I also resigned from IMS. And from the first week of March, I had my first private student in my own entity. Now, my first student was a reference from another student who had previously studied under me. So that process was a bit easier. Otherwise, it might have been a lot harder to get my first student. I know companies or people who have had to wait months, maybe required external funding,
Right.
but thankfully I had reasonably saved reserve funds. And my main objective at that stage, instead of student acquisition, at least instead of student acquisition in the normal sense, let's say through Google Ads, Instagram, Facebook, because I wasn't really convinced with the efficacy of those platforms, right? I thought those platforms would be good once you have already established a brand name, and then the goal is to simply focus on
Right.
revenue,
Right.
right? My goal was really to build a brand, right? Some part of the credibility aspect had already been taken care of through the students I had taught over the course of 5 to 6 years, through my LinkedIn profile, really, through my testimonials on LinkedIn. So I decided to use LinkedIn as my platform to write content, right? So just to write general ideas about the GMAT
Right.
exam, some technical pieces about the verbal section of the GMAT. That's what I really focus on, the verbal section. How to get a V44, for example, the 98th percentile in verbal, because the verbal section is really the section that Indian applicants find the most challenging,
Right.
right? Simply because English is not our native language. Math we have all been doing for at least 16 to 17 years. It's almost like second
Yeah.
nature
Yeah.
to us, right? So then I started creating content around that. Then I created my own website. So registered my company. So even those were very, very, time consuming steps, because I was doing all of that for the first time,
Right.
right? I had never gone through the process of hosting my own domain. So getting the domain name, HostGator, everything, and then creating the content for the website, then registering my own company. Of course, they were, now looking back, just minor administrative things. But when you're doing it for the first time, I always believe that you should do it yourself for the first time. Taki, when you have to do it later, you can always outsource it to someone
Right.
else. But you should not start by outsourcing, because if you don't know how to do it as the founder of the company, then chances are there is a very good, likelihood that other people might simply tell you different things that are completely untrue or maybe a bit distorted, right? So my thought process has always been this: कि even if I have to outsource, I have to gain mastery over the thing I'm outsourcing so that I can guide the person in terms of the best way to accomplish that task,
Right.
right? And not look for, shortcuts or start the research from the ground up. I don't want them to create the wheel. I want to create the wheel which they can then easily replicate,
Right.
right? And extend if needed. So those were the other administrative things. So it was basically working for, as any entrepreneur would, 16 to 20 hours. And the good thing is that none of it was, funded by any external VCs or anything like that. Simply because, again, at the starting stages, I thought there is just no point, right? Then it would just be the constant pressure of getting students, pushing ads, and that, in my mind at least, would have not been too good for the credibility aspect. Because what I was trying to do was something very, very different from what a lot of the established players sort of do in the test prep arena, at least on the GMAT prep side of things. But the same idea also goes to CAT, GRE, etc. What I wanted to avoid was the idea that somebody who does not have a good GMAT score would be teaching the batches. So even to date, I still teach all of my batches. There are only two batches that I have. And the second is I wanted to focus on medium sized batches, right? The goal at that stage was 10. Now the goal is 20, 25. But still medium sized batches, not a batch of 50, 60, 40 odd students, because that would again disrupt the learning process and it would just be a revenue making endeavor, right? And that's always the thing that I want to avoid, that even if the revenue is slightly on the lower side, the focus has to be on quality and brand building, right? Even 2 years, 2.5 years into my venture, my focus is always on how can we do it better? Can we automate something? Can we create better content, right? Can we create the most relevant, up to date content? Those sorts of
Right.
things. Of course, a bit of the focus has to be on the revenue front as well. But the majority of the efforts, if you were to look at my LinkedIn, is really around the strategic aspects of GMAT
Yeah.
prep, the webinars, the in conversation with webinars that I have with my high scorers, etc., and so on and so forth. And then from 2019 onwards, I suppose, once I had my private students signing up, then last year, which was 2022 mid, I decided to sort of launch batches, right? Because well, not everybody did want to sign up for private tutoring simply because of the
Right. Right.
economics, right? So I thought there could be a better, more economical option for those who are actually looking to study in small to medium sized
Right.
batches, right? So that has always been my focus. It's not the case that I'm going to fill my batch with 30 or 40 students. The max that I'm looking for is 2025, and beyond that, it basically gets shifted into the next
Right.
batch, right? So that's sort of the overarching motto of mine. Keep high quality GMAT prep from real GMAT scorers. That is very rare to get because if the brand name is there, usually people जिनके ऊपर ब्रांड बनता है मतलब usually people who are advertised are not the people who are teaching the students, so that feels a little bit underhanded to me. And the second, of course, is there is really no control on the batch sizing, right? So I have taught batches with 30 or 40 students, and it gets really, well, I suppose it gets really tiring for the student also, because imagine a class of 2.5 odd hours, right? That's usually the standard duration of a class, in which you have to cover concepts, solve at least 10 to 15 questions. Usme, if let's say the bottom 30 or 40th percentile don't understand, then they don't get too much of a chance to ask questions
Right.
either,
Right.
right? And that problem cannot really be addressed through doubt solving sessions either, simply because of the
Right.
timings, right? Or the time dedicated to a doubt solving session. So, again, the way I have worked around that process is again automated. That is, for every batch, we have a batch WhatsApp group, and I'm pretty much active on WhatsApp. So, on WhatsApp group, on that WhatsApp group itself, I am there, my other mentor is there, and we have got three other part-time subject mentors who immediately can respond to the doubts. So students don't have to write lengthy emails to get a
Right.
response, or they don't have to wait for a week to get their queries sorted, right? So the overarching goal is to minimize the dropout rates, right? Because when I taught, I always observed this, that after, let's say, a third of the course, the dropout rate from the course was as high as 50%, right? Because the GMAT is not an exam like the CAT. In the CAT, there is only one day a year on which the exam is
Right.
conducted, right? So it is a lot easier to stay motivated because it's a dedicated this start date, this
Correct.
end date,
Correct.
right? The GMAT or the GRE is an exam which can be written any day of the year,
Right.
right? So it does not have a fixed start date or a fixed end date. So then students think, okay, maybe I'm not too good for this batch. Maybe I'll just wait for a few more days, then join the new batch. And again, once the dropout happens, it's very difficult to get back into that mindset and also into that flow, right? Because most of our students are working
Right.
professionals, right? So again, the work scope can always creep up,
Right.
right? And then it's a never-ending process, right? So that's the thing we want to avoid. We are priced very, very competitively. We are priced at least 25% lower than the leading market players. And we are also priced 10% higher than, let's say, the purely automated AI programs, right? Simply because actual people are
Yeah.
involved. But then that is the goal, key to provide that sort of service at a very, very economical cost.
Got it, Param. Thank you so much for walking me
Sure.
through this. Gave me a lot of insights into what you're doing, and then it's going to help me easily ask you questions from whatever you've already spoken. So I'm going to
Absolutely.
go right back to the point. When so
Sure.
you finished your 12th, and then you go to Australia for your undergrad, correct? And then after the first year, you start teaching. That's your first experience with teaching or private tutoring.
Correct. First paid
First paid
experience with
experience.
teaching.
Right. Okay.
Indeed.
So you had your unpaid experience back in India itself?
That was more an informal sort of thing of study
Study
groups,
groups.
groups of 2, 3 students. So that
That's
probably
where
does not
you
count. I
got
think
your confidence to kind of go and probably help.
I suppose so. I suppose
Got it.
so.
Got it.
Indeed. Indeed. But I always believe that unless it is paid, there is no accountability, right? So I still like to think of it as from 2009 onwards that I was sort of, doing it, on a part-time basis, but at a professional level.
Absolutely. So how was your first experience of teaching in Australia?
It was great actually because I think in that regard, so Australia provided me with a pretty good opportunity because well, I mean, it wasn't very cumbersome, I suppose, technically, because all you had to do was go through tute questions, look for a few demos. So I basically was in the computer science program in which I completed my degree. So you basically had to check whether the code compiled, whether there was no plagiarism, that sort of thing, right? And you had to grade the
Right.
student, right? So it's not the case that you had to know the ins and outs of the subject 100%. Basically, their criteria for selecting you was whether you had scored more than 90 in a particular subject, and therefore the understanding was that you would know the subject well
Right.
enough, right? So that wasn't ever an issue. And I suppose people there weren't as competitive as students in India, right? So they were pretty chilled and the marking was also pretty chilled, right? I mean, in fact, the course supervisor told us, unless, they have done a terrible job, just try to grade them on a curve, right? I mean, that was the whole phenomenon that it was a Gaussian sort of or a bell sort of distribution, whatever they call it. So basically, you give pretty much everyone a 7 on 10 or an 8 on 10, unless someone was exceptional and they deserved a 10 on 10, or unless someone had completely copied somebody else's assignment, in which case you just flagged it to your supervisor, right? But the main passion there was that I suppose it gave me the confidence to speak publicly in front of a group of 10 to 15
Right.
students rather than a group of just two to three
Right.
students, right? You're still standing in front of the class, although it wasn't an auditorium, it was just a normal sized hall, but you're still facing the
Yeah.
students, right? And that always takes a different skill from just sitting in a group of two to three students, right? Of course, it's not the same skill as standing in front of an
Of course.
auditorium. That's an entirely different ballgame. But I think that provided me the opportunity to fine tune my speaking skills, because when you're doing it for the first time, you always get
Yeah.
nervous, right? Basically, you think, what will people think of you? Or there is just that concept of stage fright. You're facing so many strangers, right? And although Australia is a very good country in terms of, equality. I mean, it's the closest thing to socialism that you'd see in a Western country, right? I mean, the class distinction is not very obvious, right? So it's not a place such as the US or the UK where you can see, मतलब गरीबी दिखती है वहाँ पे. So Australia में you don't see too much गरीबी, you don't see too much poverty, you don't see too much show off either. I mean, you don't see BMWs or Mercedes in Australia. So it was a pretty equal society, and there was no concept of racism or anything like that. So I consider myself extremely lucky to have sort of eased into that role and be at the position that I am today.
Great. Since you spoke about stage fear and your initial experiences, did you undergo any of that, and did you figure things out to sort it out for yourself? If yes, what did you do?
A little bit. Of course, before you have your first tutorial, the night before, you always wonder, what will happen. And I suppose my best way of overcoming, and I don't know whether this works for others as well, my way was just what I had learned throughout my childhood is that be an expert in the concepts that you're going to cover in the class, right? So the tute sheet that we had to cover in that particular session, before the session started, I ensured that the previous evening I spent at least 4 to 5 hours going through all the questions, making my own notes, right? And I've always found when I write something down and I've truly and thoroughly mastered that topic, then the stage fright goes away. Basically, there is still going to be that 10%, which is just the fear of speaking to a group of students, right? But if you're confident in your domain, then that respect sort of occurs organically, right? You don't have to strive for respect. And then I think students warm up to you a lot easier, right? And if the audience warms up to you a lot easier, then a lot of the stage fright automatically goes away. So my approach as a teacher was always to be a friend, a colleague to a student, right? And that's how I sort of approached it. Instead of looking at it from a teacher student perspective, I always approached it from a friend to friend
Right.
discussion sort of
Right.
perspective, right? And that I suppose was also easier because I wasn't the lecturer, I was only the
Right.
tutor,
Right.
right? So it was a much more informal sort of thing.
But yeah, after you said what you said, it seems pretty obvious. Hey, if you know whatever you're to teach, then why do you have to be scared? Yeah.
True.
Uh,
Then why do you have to be scared, right? I mean, that initial awkwardness, I suppose, would still be
of
there,
course.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, there are 10 to 15 people in front of you. They are all looking up to you. They have come up for an early morning class. They are sleepy. They are drinking their coffee. They would rather be elsewhere, right? So to encourage them, to motivate them, you have to, well, of course, be good at motivating, but that, I suppose, is a byproduct of you really being clear with your
Yeah.
concepts, right? Otherwise, it's basically a circus, right? I mean, you might as well work in a circus if the sole goal is just to, motivate and entertain. The background, the core frameworks have to be in place, right? It has to be substantive.
Got it. Of course, as you said, it may not work with everybody because there are a lot of people who might be masters, but then they say that the moment they see a large crowd, they forget everything and they freeze and stuff. But that's a different topic for another day, I think. But Param, you finished your undergrad and you took the GMAT, but you didn't do your MBA, correct?
That is correct. So, and the reason why I wrote the GMAT was actually with an
Okay,
intention of doing my
right.
MBA, right? And then at the same time, when I came back to India, I also thought of applying to jobs, right? So that's where Jamboree happened. And then the role sort of blossomed over the years that the MBA plan sort of took a backseat, and then it always kept getting delayed, and even to date it has been delayed. So now my, of course, metrics for doing an MBA would be very, very different. Now my metrics would be expansion and scale, and whether an MBA could help with that. But I mean, back of my mind, there was always this belief that ultimately an MBA degree is an academic program,
Right.
right? So if you do have the bandwidth to sort of actually learn by practice, right? I mean, that's what you're sort of paying for, right? Because learning by practice would always take more effort, would always take a longer amount of time versus a degree that sort of just gives you those, credentials that you can do
Right.
this without actually, maybe practically applying it. So if you have that bandwidth, then there is nothing that can substitute for practical experience,
Right.
right? Of course, an MBA does help, right? I mean, we have all seen that on even shows such as Shark Tank, right? Especially the Indian version of Shark Tank. Usually, people who come from ISPs or IMs, right? They usually do get funded most of the time,
Right.
right? And then when somebody does not have that premier institute tag, then they have to sort of compensate for that through incredible numbers,
Correct.
basically, or an incredible product idea. But that's what an MBA degree sort of does. It establishes that credibility. And at this stage, I am still organically sort of enhancing that. And then maybe later one day, I might look at an executive MBA now, because a 2 year MBA would not really make sense for me
Right.
now. But an executive MBA, I suppose, definitely has its, pros, even a couple of years down the line.
Got it, Param. What I make of what you've said so far is it was not an intention of yours to be doing what you're doing now. It seems pretty much like things falling into place sort of a thing. So,
Things falling into place. Yeah, 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 yeah. So, I mean, I always did want to be a teacher. That much
oh,
was
right.
certain, right?
Okay.
So that part was definitely there. Now the only question was, which subject did I want to be a teacher in? Ideally, I would have loved to be a teacher in a in a college unit, undergrad unit, that kind of thing. But in India, that doesn't really pay well, and places where it does pay well, require you to have a PhD at the very least, right? And have 3 or 4 years of research experience, which I, of course, did not have. And then the decision was, should I then invest an additional 3 to 4 years getting my PhD, or then should I, start off with something that pays maybe a bit lower, but still well, I mean, I started off at Jamboree with about 45,000 per month, which is not a lot of money really, but it gives you enough at that stage if the true objective is just to learn as much
Yeah.
as
Yep.
possible and still get some amount of money just to survive, right? So that was the goal at that point in time. Ki I did not want to invest an additional 3 to 4 years without getting any fixed income or any fixed salary, because I thought that since I'd be starting afresh in India from 2015 onwards or 2016, then having a salary, whatever that salary might be, is important. Matlab, I don't have that luxury of just studying again for another 3 to 4 years without any fixed income or
Correct.
without any salary. So it's not quite like the Accidental Prime Minister, the movie that you have. Maybe accidental GMAT teacher, but definitely not accidental teacher. So
Got
there
it.
you are.
Param, given that you always wanted to be a teacher, it's just that where what you wanted to teach was it happened in a different way. For
True.
those who are listening, and trust me, I have spoken to a lot of youngsters who still want to become teachers. For whatever reason, when they are in their school, high school, some kids even today they say they want to grow up and be teachers, right? But the people around them, they don't know what are the different sorts of opportunities that there are for teachers, and they think teaching is a very underpaid job and stuff
बिल्कुल
like that.
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल
uh,
बिल्कुल
Given the exposure that you have, you seem to come across like a person who does your research well. And for example, the way you explained about what you wanted to be a teacher in an undergrad college unit, but then you put very well about how the economics work and why it may not be as lucrative. So if you have to address high schooler, or somebody who are in their teens or late teens who want to be a teacher, what are the options they have? What may be their misconceptions about higher pedigree but low pay, but unpopular high paying teaching jobs? If you can just talk a little bit about that, I think it'll be very useful.
Sure. Absolutely. So, one thing which I will say, Jag, is it is true that most teaching jobs are sadly underpaid. I mean, that's one of those sad
Yeah.
realities of the educational system in India, right? But the same also goes for the educational systems in Australia, US as well,
Right.
right? Even in Australia, I was making close to $30 an hour as a part-time teaching assistant. But someone who is a consultant, let's say, would be easily making 200 or 500 or even $1,000 an hour,
Wow. Okay.
right? So it wasn't too low. I mean, you can survive on $30 an hour, but that disparity is always going to be there,
Right.
right? So your motivation for becoming a teacher should never be to become a crorepati or a millionaire any which way, right? And those whose motivations are that, they ultimately don't do very well, right? I mean, for example, if you look at Byju's, if you look at Quota, for example, right? I mean, sure, they are extreme examples to take, but if your only goal or your object, even if one of your goals behind becoming a teacher is to become, an Arabpati or a Crorepati or a multimillionaire, I suppose you're in the wrong profession, right? I mean, there are jobs that enable you to become that. You could look at a banking job, you could look at a computer programming, network programming sort of job. They will pay you millions, right? Because nobody else, there are very few people who can do them,
Right.
right? Your goals for becoming a teacher should be a bit different, right? Um, it should be okay. I mean, it should be above average pay because ultimately you are influencing the lives of the
Right.
youngsters, the youth in the country. So you should be paid for that. But you should not have, resorts in your name, right? Your goal should really be a bit more, I suppose, support oriented, right? A good teacher is someone that people remember throughout their lives, right? The impact that a teacher
Yeah.
has is someone that anyone
Yeah.
remembers, right? So that's the way I always looked at it. Ki instead of becoming a crorepati and having no support, I would rather remain, a lakpati and have the support of well wishers, right? People whom I can bank upon, people who can support me. Because ultimately, to live a reasonably good life in India, even if you're earning 80 to 90,000 a month, that's much more than reasonable, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, let's say you're living in Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, right? The metro cities. Let's say you're living even in a posh locality, your rent and your food, let's say you're eating from outside, would not be more than 60,000, max to max,
Right.
right? And that's assuming the poshest of
Right.
localities,
Right.
right? So then you always have the chance to save and live a comfortable life, right? The goal in education should never be greed, and I don't want to be all moralistic about it, but there are plenty of other jobs that do fuel that kind of lifestyle, right? I mean, if resorts, private jets, clubs, they motivate you, weekend partying, all the booze, all the sorts of things, then there are many other jobs that allow you that opportunity. If you look at a big four consulting firm, if you look at the pharma industry, if you look at networking, computer networking as a job, banking as a job, they pay easily 5 to 6 lakhs a month, right? So those jobs are always there. So in your initial stages, your goals for becoming a teacher should be A, you really get enjoyment and that kick from explaining things to someone, right? Because not everyone can do
Right.
that,
Right.
right? We all have, horrible bosses who don't explain anything, for
Yeah.
example, or who can't explain, right? Because explaining takes patience, right? B, you need to be very, very patient. And C, this is something which you'll be doing repetitively for the rest of your life, right? Because if you're a teacher in a particular domain, by and large, by and large, the coursework does not change
Correct.
much,
Correct.
right? मतलब जो चीज़ 1970 में था वो 2020 में भी by and large relevant है. Maybe there is a 20-30% change, But you have to be prepared to repeat the same thing over and over and over and over again. And again, if you're someone who gets bored by that sort of repetitive task, again, becoming a teacher is not the sort of thing that you should look to do, at least not on a long term
Right.
basis, right? And the money will come. I mean, you will have enough to keep everything going in place, right? You won't be a millionaire. Matlab, you can be a millionaire, but then usually there are no good ways of becoming a millionaire, as the saying goes. So, through teaching, you definitely should not aspire to become a billionaire. You should aspire to maybe live in the top 5% or even in the top 10%, and a teaching job will definitely provide you with that. And if you're an exceptional teacher, let's say you're teaching for IIT, JEE, those sorts of subjects, you can even become a crorepati, right? For example, working at Bansal, those sorts of places, they easily pay that sort of money, right? But for most teaching jobs, they will give you a lifestyle that will definitely be in the top 5 to 10% of the populace.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering if it was my computer. Got it, Param. Thank you
Oh.
for that. Now, when it comes to teaching, right? Just another aspect that I want to touch upon is now you got to be a little smart also. Being a teacher, the best practices, because people, you want to be good. There are people out there, who will exploit your goodness also. So, what's the balance in your view as to, still be a good teacher? Point is not to become a millionaire or, amass
True.
crores of rupees and stuff like that, but it's easily comfortable to be in the top 1% to the top 5%. In fact,
Easily.
recently there was a statistic that said, if you're earning more than 60,000 rupees in India, you're in the top 5% of the world.
Exactly.
So it's
Exactly.
not very difficult. Even being a
It's
teacher, you
not
can
very
do it
difficult.
because there are people, who charge 4,000 rupees to 9,000 rupees per hour for these test prep coaching as well. So can we safely say today, as we speak in India, the highest paying opportunity in teaching is related to these test preps, especially the go abroad and study test preps?
Yeah, maybe. Maybe. Although the other aspect of that is entrance exams such as the CAT, in which I suppose the um, initial costs aren't that high, but the volume of students is just so humongous that if you look at it from an overall revenue perspective, that is going to be much greater any day of the week, right? If you look at the percentage of people who want to go abroad versus the percentage of people who want to stay in India, it would be an 80-20 sort of split, right? So Indian exams will always have a higher margin, right? Especially percentage of people who want to go abroad to do an MBA. There might be people who want to go abroad to do their undergrad, for which SAT or ACT would be the exam, but not
Right.
GMAT. But MBA abroad would cost easily 1 CR plus, right? So the percentage of such people or such students would be very much on the lower side. Actually, the most amount of revenue that you can get in education is if you sell courses, right? I mean, that's really the way, or self-help courses, all of those, things which are just pure gimmicks. They seem to sell well simply because they charge 100 rupees per course or 199 per course, and they are just nothing courses really. Basically scams or borderline scams without it really being scams. But yeah, I mean, study abroad as a sector does not really have too much in the revenue front any which way, right? Simply because you don't have the volume. That's the main
Right.
thing, right?
Got it. Got it, Param. It's kind of interesting that you spoke about these 99 rupees courses and 200 rupees courses. Why do you call them? Why you clearly implied that students should be buying them. Why?
Um, well, because if something is that cheap, it can never be good, right? I mean, I'm not saying ki something has to be a 1 lakh rupee laptop for the laptop to be good, but if a laptop is priced at 5,000 rupees, then you can pretty much rest assured that it won't last too long, right? So whenever you're trying to sell something at, let's say, 90% off, or 100% off, or something, at a huge discount, then the quality gets compromised, right? The only reason they can sell something for 199 or 99 or even 1000 rupees is that they are simply not going to do anything for you in that amount of money, right? Um, if you look at the expenses in India, what does 200 rupees buy you? Pretty much nothing, right? I mean, it can't buy you too much, correct? So why would someone, want you to be a millionaire um, by you just paying 200 rupees, right? I mean, that just doesn't seem to make any logical sense. So then the only other explanation is कि it's just a gimmick or a scam sort of thing. And then one should always do their own research, right? So it's always going to be a trade-off between time and the amount of money one
Right.
invests, right? So either go for a truly certified course, which might cost a bit more, maybe 10, 15,000, or you put in the own time to research Google Scholar, databases, places like that, and then you get up to speed on those topics, right? But otherwise, if the course is so cheap, then basically the idea is okay, 99 rupees may not be too much, so you might say okay, क्या बात है 100 ही रुपए जाएंगे. But then फिर जो आप time waste करोगे, that 3 to 4 months of time, that is a much greater currency,
Right.
right? In which you could have made much more than whatever amount of
Yeah.
money, and that is also lost because you spend that amount of time
Yeah.
in that course,
Yeah.
right?
No.
So
Absolutely.
that's
Point
the
taken.
downside.
Param, you said, your first student was pretty easy for you because students who studied previously under you referred. What's the story of your first non-referral student? How did you get?
Story of my first non-referral student. Well, so she was a GMAT retaker. She had already written the GMAT
Right.
before, and then she came across my LinkedIn profile. So again, everything basically occurred through my LinkedIn
Right.
profile,
Right.
right? That's the only advertising platform that I use, and it wasn't even really advertisement. It was really, just GMAT prep strategy, the GMAT verbal section, technical aspects pieces, those sorts of things. And then we got on a call. So it was a pretty good call. So whenever a student inquires with me, I always give them 45 minutes to an hour of my own time,
Wow.
right?
For free.
Even though I have, yeah, for free, absolutely. Just explaining the ins and outs of the course, right? Or if they have taken the GMAT previously, then there is a document called the enhanced score report, which basically gives you a performance breakdown by topic,
Right.
right? Ki how you performed in the different topics. So that is an analysis I always do myself for free, right? And then of course I do have my counseling team, I do have my administrative team in
Right.
place, but the first call always occurs through me. So, and then I think that was a great motivator, because nobody really, from at least what I have heard, or there are very few people who actually get on a one on one call with the
Yeah.
student, right? Usually the sales team is the first point of call, right? Or you have to write emails to them. Basically, nobody wants to give that much amount of time for
Yeah.
free,
Yeah.
right? I never have any problems with that because to me, the student has to be the king because anybody who pays any amount of money to me should have accountability from me, right?
Right.
Which is why I take my own batches, I do the doubt
Right.
solving, right? And the reviews are reasonably good. But the main point is, I don't want to be the person who takes the money from the student, but am not accountable to the student. कि आपके faculty कोई और है, आप उनसे बात कर लो types, right? Because then that just feels a bit too nebulous. I mean, the student signed up by saying my credentials, and then I'm handing him or her over to somebody else. But anyways, long story short, the point was, कि I think that initial 1 hour call, that sort of convince the student that we are not here just for his or her money, right? And that we are actually experts in the topics that we are teaching, right? So I think that sort of, organically led to the conversion.
Got it, Param. Param, you also said, you started off with students that came via referral, and then you just shared your first non-referral student story. From the time you went out, on your own, how long did it take for you to land this non-referral student?
Not too long, I think. Maybe 3 to 4 weeks. Probably not even that. Because I constantly
Right,
post on
right,
LinkedIn,
right.
right? So that work always kept happening in the background.
Got it.
So it wasn't a sequential sort of thing. It was also a lot of the things happening in parallel.
Got it. And your posting on LinkedIn, when did it start? Did it only start after you, branched out, or did it start from your Jamboree days as well?
Probably from my Jamboree days, although that was not too
Got it.
frequent. I mean, that was very, very occasional. And then when I decided to start my
That is
own,
when you
then it
became
was,
active. And it took just 3 to 4 weeks for you to land a student.
yeah, pretty much. The other thing, of course, which I should mention is I already had testimonials on my LinkedIn
Right,
page from my Jamboree and IMS days.
right, right.
So they also played a part, right? So it wouldn't be quite as simple as just having no LinkedIn profile and then getting there in 3 to 4 weeks. So I think those testimonials definitely
This
helped
is
over the
amazing.
course of.
For the teachers, who are listening in, who might be working for other academies, if you do not have time to build your LinkedIn profile, the least you can do is have the student write a testimonial for you, recommendation for you on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for that. That's a big
Absolutely.
takeaway. Um,
Hmm.
and Param, starting off when you went outside private independent, right? How did you decide upon the pricing that you were to charge? You started off one-on-one, right? Which is uh, it's a little tricky situation because you need to get the right amount of money
Sure.
to make your time
Hmm.
worth
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
also.
Worth
So
it as
how
well.
did you arrive at the
Absolutely.
pricing, and what was your starting pricing back in the day when you didn't have as much experience as an independent tutor?
Right. So my starting price was 2000 an hour and 1800 if they would buy 10 hours. So it was a pretty nominal rate, right? The way through which in which I came upon this rate was the private tutoring rates at Jamboree and IMS were very, very similar to this. It was 1500 plus GST. So, and I knew other independent tutors would have a much higher rate,
Right.
right? So then I decided to keep it the lowest possible rate. There is nothing lower than this. And then, slowly the idea would be to grow ex- organically as and when, the brand, the credibility was established. So that was the key idea that you start off at a reasonable rate, the lowest possible amongst these institutions. And then, of course, you can only grow from there.
Got it, Param. And as of now, you're totally online. Am I correct?
Totally online,
Okay.
absolutely.
And I'm sure the lockdown played a huge role in people moving
I think
towards
it did.
online. But was that the first time even you went online, or did you have experience teaching online even before that?
No, 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 no. Even at Jamboree and IMS, I always used to teach both online and
Right.
offline, right? So I would take classes over Zoom, Adobe Connect. So online was actually a platform that I was, for some reason, more comfortable in, right? Usually, teachers that I've come across are more comfortable teaching face to
Correct.
face, in
Yeah.
person. Right? For me, having access to the whiteboard where I could type as and when I solved the question, that was something a bit more comfortable to me. And it was always audio sessions. I mean, there wouldn't be any video on. So that enabled me to sort of gather my thoughts and then, even explain in the best possible manner because my eyes do tend to drift from this side to that side. And that, for some reason, resulted, or not for some reason, but that resulted in a better delivery. Um, I think the whole online platform actually worked to my benefit.
That's a rare thing. Uh,
Indeed, indeed is
yeah.
indeed.
Lot.
So that stage fright, I suppose, still hasn't completely gone away. I mean, if the stage fright goes away, it's like you can, look the person in the eye and still explain what you have to. So I suppose, my eyes do divert from, position X to position Y as I'm gathering my thoughts and explaining, right? And online, if the cameras are off, that always is a much more natural process, right? Because then the focus can purely be on the subject matter instead of having to worry about your eyes, your hand movements, hand gestures, all those sorts of things.
Right, right, Param. Param, you also said, you started off teaching one to one, and then you just last year, sometime mid 2022, you started batch. There are a lot of questions around this for me, but my first question would be, as a teacher, how different is it to do one on one versus one to many?
So for with me, it's actually again a little bit of the opposite to the usual trend. I actually enjoy my one-on-one sessions a lot more than my batch sessions,
Okay,
right? Because one-on-one may I can also truly understand the
right,
student if that sort of makes
right, right,
sense, right? Batch sessions may sure I can deliver the concepts, I can teach them what they need to know to get a good score on the GMAT, but I somehow don't have that connect with the
right,
student,
right,
right? So that I feel is something that one-on-one allows me to do, and that I suppose is a lot more of a friendship plus teachership kind of relationship,
right,
right? And that I always enjoy a lot more than a batch session,
right,
right? Batch sessions, of course, do provide a feasible way, both for the student as well as for
right.
me, to conduct the same sorts of the same coverage of topics in a unified platform, right? But there isn't really that much scope to interact to an extent that you can truly know the student, right? For what he is as a person, or how he or she thinks, right? And those are the sorts of insights I always like to have about my students, just for the sake of it. You want to know as many people as you can, and because I rarely get out of my house, there isn't really a chance for me to know too many people. So the classes are the only ways through which I come across new people, right?
Got it, Param. And it's quite interesting that you enjoy one on one more, but then you had to start batch teaching last year. What was
Indeed,
the
indeed.
thought process behind that?
Mainly scale, nothing else. So I'll just be, completely honest. I mean, I could put an altruistic spin on it, but it was mainly scale, nothing apart from that.
Great. No, I was the reason I asked you this question now was I wanted to touch the scaling topic, right? For a lot of independent private tutors out there, it's very lucrative when you start off, but a couple of years down the line, you start to realize, oh, you know what? No matter what I do, this is how much I can go max as an individual guy. How many hours can you teach in a day, right? And if people think there are 24 hours, I can teach 12 hours, it's all a myth, because I've heard teachers say that when they teach five
Absolutely.
hours a day, it drains
Max.
energy a lot, right?
Indeed, indeed. Because, if you're a good teacher, even 3 to 4 hours is sort of the max that I can do on any given day. Because imagine what's happening, Chuck. You're talking continuously for 2.25 hours,
Yeah,
right? And that's not an easy thing to do. And it's not just a monotonous conversation. You have to modulate your voice. You have to capture the attention of
yeah,
the
yeah,
students, right? So you have to modulate your voice as well. And then it's a pretty tricky job, right? And I think not too many people would be able to speak as for as long as I have, with you, right? So that takes a
absolutely.
little bit of
Yeah,
practice. Because talking is one activity that requires the greatest amount of energy, right? Now, apart from just the scales, it's not so much that you can't make more than a certain amount as an independent private tutor. But then the point was that I wanted to increase my reach, so to speak, right? So scaling does not necessarily mean financial scaling. Maybe it could mean that, but at least when I wanted to scale, it was mainly from the point of view of
correct.
outreach, right? I wanted to reach out to more students. I wanted more students to be privy to the sorts of methods, the concepts I teach on the GMAT, and how my pedagogy can help them score in the 99 percentile,
Right.
right? That was basically the goal. And what I didn't want to do was create an AI program for that,
Right.
right? I still wanted to be
Right.
involved, and then batches were sort of the only way, right? And as you can imagine, if I'm taking on batches, then that would also mean that I'm slashing off private sessions for the same reason that you can't teach more than 3 to 4 hours a day, right? Because then you're not really teaching. Then it's just like you're speaking for the sake of speaking, and that has a draining impact on your body, on your mental health, on a lot of things, basically.
Got it. So, have you gotten really richer since the last year, since you started batch?
No, no, unfortunately not. I wish I could, but my tax returns would probably at best show an 8 or 9% increment year on year. And that sort of is already accounted for by inflation. So, wish I could say that, but no, it's actually sort of a myth because, even if you are increasing your outreach, the amount of time that it will take for the private revenue, the batch revenue to offset the private revenue you have to give up, that will be at least 3 to 4 years, right? And then you have to run multiple batches, you have to hire more people. But at this stage, that is not something I'm too keen on doing because quality is really important
Right.
to me. So I'd much rather let go of 3 to 4 lakhs and say, okay, I'm satisfied with a lesser amount, but I will be the one who will be teaching the classes, right? Maybe there will come a stage when I will look to hire new faculty, maybe expand or scale in the financial sense of things. But at least for the next year, that's not in the pipeline. Maybe the year after, because you do always want to innovate. And then one of the aspects of innovation could also be financial innovation. So, absolutely, that idea will be there at a later stage. It's just not there at this stage.
Got it, Param. Param, it's not that it's only applies to teachers, but more so for teachers like you, because yours is not so much of a business, because it is a business technically, but then if students are coming back, it's because of the teacher that Param is, because as it is with so many other teachers, students are behind a certain teacher, about whom they've heard from other people. So when you think, no matter what I do, the amount of time that I'll have to put in on a day-to-day basis is not going to change much. Have you mulled over
Agree.
it, and have you become comfortable with that, or how's your mind as far as that is concerned?
Yeah, I mean, the main issue, I suppose, there, Jack, is not so much the amount of time you can put in a day. It's also the time of day that students actually want to learn, right? Because most of our students are working
Right,
professionals,
right,
right?
right.
So then there are only two slots that are really available to them, and that is post 7 p.m. or pre 9 a.m., right? For me, it's always got to be post 7 p.m. because I'm not a morning person. So that's one half of the audience that automatically goes away.
Right.
And then even if I, let's say, want to say ki, okay, I'll teach for maybe now 6 hours per day, right? There is just no one who would want to learn at 12 o'clock in the afternoon or 3 o'clock in the
Correct.
afternoon because everyone would be working, right? So it's not quite as simple as just increasing my teaching hours. And then I suppose the other aspect to it also is key. Okay, on the one hand, it might look 8 to 10, 10:30 to 12:30. Okay, let's say that's the max I would teach a day. But then when you're speaking for 4 hours on a non-stop basis, almost late night, it's also very difficult to sleep normally, right? Your adrenaline keeps rushing. You don't sleep before 3 or 3:30. You just can't
Correct.
sleep, right? When you've been
Yeah,
speaking so
yeah.
much. So then that again has a cumulative effect, right? So that is something which I've come to terms with because there is no other option for me. The only other option would be to wake up early morning and to stay up late night just for the sake of maybe an extra few dollars, and that's not something I'm very comfortable with because much more than those extra few dollars will go towards improving my health and that will come into the equation if I don't get adequate sleep. So sleep is not something I can compromise on. So that's sort of the idea.
Got it. Would you call yourself an introvert?
To a certain extent, yeah. My wife calls me that, and yeah, I would as well. Introvert, maybe. Introvert from a personal perspective, right? So I've always been shy, reluctant to open up to people, right? Sort of, I suppose, thinking what others will think of me, how others will judge me, right? Whether I'll be speaking the right sorts of things, and maybe a little bit of it was experience. Maybe the people whom I came across earlier were too judgmental, or did expect a certain way of speech or a certain set of mannerisms. But yeah, I mean, so that also was in the foundational stages of my journey. So but then that's why I also like to be maybe a little bit of an introvert personally, but I like to be an extrovert professionally, right? I
Yeah.
mean, if you want to talk to me about, let's say, the GMAT, then I'll be more than happy to talk to you in the extremities of details surrounding the GMAT. But yeah, on a personal front, maybe a bit more introvert, simply because unless I sort of truly know what the other person is thinking or what the other person
Right.
is, I basically, my defensive mechanisms are, they engulf me, right? This is maybe something that you should not say, or this would be too much information, or this would be perceived in this manner. So I suppose that's what the classic definition of an introvert is.
Got it. Sorry about that little detour.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. I mean, completely fine. Uh,
but
this is a pretty good interview. Actually, I'm enjoying it. So this is a bit like unplugged sort of series, in which you get the true, the true feelings or the true reactions to a particular question.
Right, right, great. Thank you for that.
Indeed.
Um, but coming back to your student acquisition, while you were doing one-on-one, LinkedIn was the way. Is it still the same way after you started your batch also?
Indeed, indeed. It's still the same. LinkedIn primarily. Um, I haven't really invested in any Google ads or Facebook, Insta, etc. The one thing which I've done is just create a Google review page for my
Right,
business, and then you have Google reviews for GMAT 30. But that's been the extent of it, right? Because LinkedIn, at least the audience, is someone who are seriously considering GMAT prep, and because I don't have such a huge bandwidth as a multi-billion-dollar institution would. For example, I don't have a sales team of 10 people or a marketing team
yeah,
of
yeah,
10. So if the queries are not directed appropriately, or if my content is not targeted to the right audience, I just won't have the bandwidth to filter the
right,
queries. So it's a little bit of a practical approach as well, the task of query
right,
management, right? Because I know that when I was the verbal head at IMS, we used to do these Facebook
right.
ads, but then query filtering and management always used to be an
Got
issue,
it.
right? You'd call up the student and they would not even speak in English or something. So it used to be a very, very cumbersome task, which is okay if you have the resources to
Correct,
manage it,
correct.
right? So that was the thing. He always focus on a more limited set than advertise to everyone.
Got it.
A bottom up approach. Keep 2 plus 2 plus 2 rather than starting off with 100 and then
Got it.
filtering it
Got it.
down.
How has your like you have your teaching time, and then you have certain admin tasks that you need to do, right? How has that changed? The operational time of yours changed when you moved from 1 to 1 to 25 per batch. Has it increased?
Right. So admin time would basically be my content creation time, doubt solving time on batches, right? या फिर किसी बच्चे को रिकॉर्डिंग का एक्सेस नहीं मिल रहा है या फिर रिकॉर्डिंग नहीं खुल रहा है तो उसको एक्सेस देना, राइट? So those troubleshooting sorts of issues, right? So that time has definitely increased because in one-on-one there would not be so many
Right,
issues,
right,
right? And of course you still have to create content, but then the challenge around that is when you write too much, then everything sort of looks the same or begins to look the same, right? I mean, I've started noticing this in my posts as well, that I use certain words quite a bit or certain phrases quite a bit. So my next challenge now is, apart from updating the or evolving the GMAT content, is also to uplift the thoughts I put out and the style of my content, which I put out on
Right.
LinkedIn. And for that, it does not happen naturally. Matlab, if it's a three-para post, it's not just the task of typing out those three paras, which would take 10-15 minutes, but it's also the back-end work that goes into
Yeah.
formulating those
Yeah.
thoughts, which could easily take up to 3
Yeah.
hours, right? Ki pehla paragraph mein this has to be the content, second para this has to be the content, these have to be the images, these have to be the hashtags, all of those things, right? So that, I suppose, is how it has changed, because to change your writing style is a really, really tricky task, because your writing style is just natural
Right.
to you,
Right.
but if you're writing everything the same way, sooner or later you lose that edge that differentiates you from others, or it just looks too advertising, right? Basically, then every post looks like an advertisement or a call out to a new batch. So then the writing style has to evolve to, sort of enable me to do that organically.
Got it, Param. Param, when I was going through your website, GMAT 30, I saw, you have a co-founder. So what's the story behind that? Because the reason I'm asking you this is this. Did you get a co-founder just because you're in verbal and you needed somebody in quant? And
Exactly.
how did you go about? See, you can still go ahead and hire somebody to teach quant, but then you
True.
decided to have a co-founder rather. What was the thought process behind this, and how did it happen?
Right. So, from the limited episodes of Shark Tank US, Shark Tank India that I've seen, I'd come to the realization that time Shark Tank India had not launched. Basically, Shark Tank US and Shark Tank Australia. So, the realization that I'd come to was that you need to have people in the company who are, stakeholders in the company that define the core of the company, right? I mean, if you're a tech company, your founder should be someone from the technical domain. You should not outsource technology to someone else, right? So that idea resonated with me, because if the core is GMAT preparation, and then there are two aspects to GMAT, verbal and quant, so it only made sense to me that the aspect which I did not involve myself in, but which was equally important, or the aspect which I did not have the time to involve
Right.
myself in, that aspect should always go to a co-founder, somebody who has a stake in the company, right? Rather than outsourcing it to someone else. Outsourcing should not ever, in my opinion, be done for the core functions.
Right. Right. Got it. Fair enough.
So that was the
Got it.
position.
And did it
And
happen
Gaurav,
organically, or how did you find your co-founder?
yeah, yeah. So Gaurav, he's the co-founder. So him, I knew from my
Oh,
Jamboree
right.
days, right? So we had kept in touch, and I knew he was a good teacher. He knew I was a good teacher. He was also looking to shift, and then we sort of talked about this basically.
Perfect. Apart from your co-founder, do you have another team? If yes, how many people do you have? What are the roles that they do?
So basically, as of now, I basically have three people who work in my education counseling team,
Right.
right? So usually I call them education liaisons, right? Because they don't really sell anything. They are more there to sort of guide students on the benefits of the course. They will be the second people to call once I have had an initial conversation with the
Right.
student, maybe share an access to a demo session of mine. Usually students ask for a demo before, they decide to sign up. So they would be responsible for that sort of thing, right? So currently, I've got three people who work on a part-time basis. Effectively, they are the second points of query, student inquiry.
Got it, Param. Param, my final aspect of this conversation would be to touch upon a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of two things. Sorry, before I go there, I just want to touch upon this topic. I was going through your LinkedIn posts and all. I came across, and you also mentioned in this podcast about your in conversation series with your students, right? When did you? That's a First of all, it's an excellent idea for any trainer who's listening out there. If you want to generate marketing content, or just to put yourself out there, it can't get easier than getting on a call with one of your high performing students and just having a casual conversation. There's so much content that can be generated. How effective has that been? How have your students inflow have increased after this?
So most of the students who attend those sorts of webinars are already my enrolled students,
Right,
right? Because they sort of know that other student, they are more keen
right,
to keep join the session, learn more about the journey. And this in conversation with idea was actually proposed to me by my wife when we were
all right,
brainstorming, okay, how to scale, how to expand, that sort of thing. And I was always against using Google Ads, right? Simply because I'm very, very, well, I'm just not convinced with the efficacy and the investment it requires, right? So then we came up with this idea ki it's a little bit similar to what Beer Biceps has, I
yeah, yeah,
suppose, in which we just converse with the student. And then we designed the poster, the creative around that. She helped me with that, and it has been very, very effective. So the idea of these in conversation with webinars is that we invite high scorers, people who have scored in the 96th percentile, 94th percentile, got into ISP, got into prestigious
right,
universities, right? So it serves as a great source of motivation for any student, really, whether enrolled or
right,
prospective,
right.
right? And student inflow, well, maybe it has not increased that much as I'd hoped, but it definitely has generated much more awareness. So that would be the best way to look at it. And that's the initial goal, right? When you're starting something, it's always got to be to generate awareness. And later down the line, the results will be there,
Got it.
right?
Uh, this How many episodes have you completed so far, and is it both
So
audio
far,
and video?
four, both audio and video. So that's pretty much the only time when I turn on the video, except during this conversation with you. Otherwise, in my classes, my videos are always off. My video is always off. My audio is on. So this in conversation with is the only time when I put on a nice shirt, shave and turn on my video, and that is just to increase engagement with the student, right? Because I understand it's very difficult to listen to somebody else's success for 1.5 hours, right? Even I find myself bored while doing that. So there, the engagement has to matter, right? When you are in a GMAT class, the focus is different. The focus is your
Correct,
success, right? How you understand the
correct.
concepts. Here, it's a bit more nuanced because you're simply looking for motivation. You're not going to get anything
Right, right,
technical,
right.
or at least not too much technical out of the
Yeah,
videos. So it's really a bit more motivational.
got it, Param. Now, the final topic that I'd like to touch upon is your business is totally online, right? So, what does your tech stack look like? What are the tools that you use?
Not too many. So I don't know why people think that you need a super fast system or something to create a good software side of things. Basically, I use Zoom. That is one of the minimum things that has to be there, simply because the recordings have to be available to the
Right,
student, and Zoom is pretty much the only tool that allows you to first access the recordings and then make the recordings available in a reasonably easy manner, and it's not as buggy as, let's say, Skype or some of the other
right,
tools, right? So that is one. Zoom. Then the other investment that I would have would be creating content. That would be more a time investment because currently I do that myself. So that takes, and content means GMAT content. So that takes nearly 10 hours to 20 hours a week, depending upon the week. Then it would be LinkedIn content, which again would be a time investment at this stage. Then I have to pay for the domain, I have to pay for the server, I have to pay for a fully functional Google suite, right? Because that provides me a few email addresses with a domain name of @gmat30.com. And then there are a couple of other paid tools which I use to create the creatives. For instance, Canva, I have got a paid membership too. And then sometimes the videos need to be edited, so I've got a paid video suite for that as well. And yeah, I mean, those are pretty much the software side of things, the expenses, and of course the mock tests that we provide. So those I purchase and then share with the student. So that's sort of the end-to-end financial and time-based content investment. So you don't really need too much. Matlab, you know, you can do with a reasonably small amount of investment as well,
Right.
right? A domain does not cost too much, server does not cost too much. What will cost you would be your time, right? Because to create content, that's really what will, ultimately capture the
Right.
audience,
Right.
right?
Right. Got it, Param. Param, if you have to, top of your mind, has there been a situation where you thought, I could automate these things, I could probably save some time? Are there any areas there which is not yet sorted?
Yeah, so I'm sort of starting to think in that direction now. Initially, I did not really want to automate too
Right.
much, right? Um, because it's a little bit like what Shah Rukh Khan says, ki money is not everything, but you should only think of that when you have enough money. So automation is not everything, but you should only think of that when you have mastered the content and the delivery. And matlab, you can automate, but you need to have the files, right? You need to have the lecture files, you need to have the assignment files, you need to have the questions, the explanations, the
Right.
answers, right? So unless you have all of that, and there is no way you can have all of that unless you have been doing that for at least 3 years,
Right.
right? In 3 years, you would have ironed everything out and you would have the perfect, the best version of
Right.
something,
Right.
right? Basically, to create the best version of, let's say, a given lecture, it, in my opinion, takes at least 3 to 4 tries,
Right.
right? In which you don't fumble, you have everything memorized end to end, and it flows organically without even needing to
Right.
memorize, right? So that's where I sort of am. I'm currently at the 2.5 year mark. Probably in another 6 months' time, I shall look to automate a few more of these functionalities. Maybe invest in a unified platform, something similar to what Jamboree or IMS has, that every student, once they enroll, they get a unified platform, and then they don't have to, go to a Google Drive or a Zoom link. Everything will be there on the platform in one unified
Got
format,
it.
right? So that does increase convenience for the students as well, which I understand. But that is something which I did not want to go into unless I had got one perfect version of every topic, every assignment, every explanation. And then the automation is just a matter of financial investment, right? At least the content side, I wanted to be sure on. So, content has always been the founding cornerstone of my business growth,
Right.
right? Um, I always believe that if content is mastered, then the growth will happen.
Got it, Param. And when it comes to, setting aside a certain amount of money for all the automations that you said, for example, the unified platform and stuff, right? For someone, who's not a huge company, but, who's not, again, a small time tutor, you have your own size and class and stuff. What's the comfortable amount of money that you think people and like you and others will be comfortable spending away every month? What do you think is worth it?
So I think there are two aspects to it, Chuck. One would be the fixed costs on a monthly
Right.
basis, and the other would be the one-time investment cost that needs to be
Right.
borne,
Right.
right? The monthly costs are actually very, very nominal. They are going to be more than maybe 10K a month in the worst case,
Right.
really, right? With 10K per month, you can do quite a
Right.
bit, right? Even 5K would really be more than adequate to maintain a website, have a server, maintain a few email IDs and maintain a Google Suite paid
Right.
version, right? So you'll never run out of storage. You'll have corporate mail IDs. You'll have space for recordings. That's really what we mean by, the nitty gritties of, let's say, an educational company, right? वही चाहिए कि recording का link के लिए storage चाहिए, domain email IDs चाहिए, and you need a website का domain and server, right? All of those things, even accounting for the most premium packages from, let's say, GoDaddy or HostGator or Google Suite, won't be more than 5K a month,
Right.
right? So that part is pretty nominal. The main cost would come in when you have a platform, right? A student login center, those sorts of
Right.
things, right? You have a professional video editing team, for example,
Right.
right? So that is the part which I haven't quite researched. And that I suppose would be a slightly greater cost, maybe even as much as 1 to 2 lakhs, right? So I haven't researched it into that much detail, but yeah, that would be my imagination because those things they do cost a little bit, right? Which is pretty much the reason why somebody has them and why others don't. So at least that would be my presumption, because it probably is not a skill thing; it's really a money thing.
Got it, Param. Param, thank you so much for your time and this conversation. It's been a very unique one for me from a lot of ways.
Yeah, yeah, same.
Because most of the times I come across people, who got into teaching business very accidentally. And you're one of those rare ones who wanted to be a teacher, but then obviously, you chose this domain a little later. So in that way, that's the only way it's been different. But otherwise, it's been great. Thank you again. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think I'll probably get back to you in a year and see, what improvements you've done to your
Would be,
processes.
yeah,
Looking
yeah,
forward to that.
absolutely. That would be great. All right, then, Jack, was great speaking with you, and thank you again for hosting me on your platform. Right, this has been an insightful conversation, and I think I learned a few more things about myself, which I hadn't really introspected during this conversation with you.
Awesome.